quarantine, shelter in place, masking, vaccines. All words we're very used to, unfortunately, in 2021. But there's a place in Appalachia 70 years ago that suffered through an epidemic of another sort and was literally quarantined from the world in an effort to fight it. Hello, folks. I'm Steve Gilly, along with Rod Mullins, and this is Stories, A History of Appalachia. Be sure to go down below and click that subscribe button if you don't mind, and ding the bell so you get notifications of all our stories as they come out. And we'd appreciate it if you'd give us a thumbs up.
Well, Steve, we've done an audio version of this before, but this time we're lending a little bit of video to it, and we're doing the story again with a little bit more information. But, I never knew about this when I was growing up, never heard about it, tossed this out even to my dad, and my dad said, I don't remember it that well and stuff taking place. Of course, I guess he was, half a continent away or half the country away when he was serving in the Air Force, but this was a big deal, especially in Virginia.
Well, I guess after this was over with, people wanted to forget all about it. And I think you can certainly understand that, what we've lived with for the last year and a half. But the place we're going to go to is Wythe County, Virginia, which was formed in 1790 and named for George Wythe, the signer of the Declaration of Independence. Wythe County was also the site of several minor Civil War battles, and it's the home county of who many call the quote-unquote first woman president, Edith Bowling Wilson, wife of Woodrow Wilson, who sort of ran the country from her husband's sickbed in 1919-1920. The county was also used by Virginia legislators as a place to escape that terrible heat that would come down in the summertime in Richmond. They would hold the Senate and General Assembly in Wytheville, Rod, before air conditioning was common, because the town's location in the Appalachian Mountains made it much cooler than the state capital.
After World War II, Wytheville found itself at the crossroads, both figuratively and literally. Wytheville was where U.S. Highways 11, 21, and 52 all intersected, making it the gateway to far southwest Virginia prior to the interstate highway system. The town was also becoming a very popular tourist attraction as well, with outdoor activities to the east, such as Claytor Lake, and with Barter Theater to the west in Abingdon. The town also boasted of 3 textile mills, a movie theater, drugstores, and a restaurant, or I should say restaurants, and then also as well as the county courthouse. But they also had a minor league baseball team, the Wytheville Statesmen, appropriately named, of the Blue Ridge League. The team played on their own baseball field that had been dedicated on May 14, 1948, and was named Withers Field after Robert E. Withers, who was a Confederate officer, newspaperman, Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, U.S. Senator, and last but not least, American Consul to Hong Kong. Withers Field is now known as Withers Park and is open to all in the Wythe County area. And all was well. That was almost like Andy Griffith's mythical Mayberry until the summer of 1950.
Now, in late June of that year, the Statesmen were playing in North Carolina. Second baseman Jim Secafino's 20-month-old son Johnny was the team mascot, and, Johnny traveled with his daddy and the team on the road. During that game, little Johnny came down with a stiff neck, runny nose, and a fever, all symptoms of a mid-20th century medical scourge called polio. His parents wasted no time in getting him to the Memorial and Crippled Children's Hospital in Roanoke, where doctors actually didn't expect him to live. But miraculously, Johnny made it. However, that's not the end of this story. The second reported case was on July 2nd, when 10-year-old Betty Carroll Jones, she was stricken, followed 2 days later by her 7-year-old sister, Emma Jean. By July 7th, the local newspaper, the Southwest Virginia Enterprise, reported that there were 5 cases in Wythe County. Rod, by the middle of July, 41 people had contracted polio, with the count rising to 106 by the end of the month. Now, this was a statewide epidemic, and Wytheville was at its epicenter with more cases than anywhere else. And this disease, by the way, wasn't choosy about its victims either. Black or white, rich or poor, longtime residents or newcomers, kids and adults all fell victim to the polio epidemic. No matter what, you got sick and you were rushed to the hospital, which in this case meant an ambulance ride to Memorial in Roanoke if you were white, or to St. Philip's Hospital in Richmond if you were black, since the hospitals at this time were segregated. And by the way, Rod, at one point there were so many cases that local funeral homes were donating the use of their hearses to transport patients to Roanoke or Richmond, believe it or not.
Wow. Well, the Wythe County Health Officer, Dr. Charles Pope, he set rules for dealing with all this going on with the polio epidemic. One, wash your hands before eating and after going to the toilet. Two, keep away from crowds and places where the public was going to be. Three, avoid excessive physical strain and get plenty of rest, especially for children. But yet the cases kept on coming. Things got so bad that Dr. Pope initiated a quarantine, not just of one block, not just of a mile or two, but the entire town of Wytheville. Signs were placed at the Wytheville, or up by the Wytheville Town Council, on three main highways and two others, warning people not to enter the town, or if they had to, don't stop when you go through town. Now, people took to flying through Wytheville with the windows rolled up tight and handkerchiefs over their mouth and noses because, really, Steve, they didn't know what was going on. Dr. Pope also closed off area swimming pools, movie theaters, summer schools, and other public places. Sounds a lot like 2021. But most parents didn't need to be told to keep their children away from those places. Now, some of the children were kept home and indoors, and that became the summer without children. It's kind of eerie hearing that title right there, The Summer Without Children. Keep in mind that, this was before the internet. This was before a lot of people had, well, they had phones, but they didn't have cell phones at the time, before texting and before email. So how did you stay in touch with one another? Usually it was reserved to seeing each other face to face or picking up the telephone and calling. But when you kept the kids inside all summer, they were inside and they were isolated, except for the telephone, like I mentioned, which was usually in the living room or the kitchen under mom and dad's watchful eye. Not as easy as it is today. Imagine what it must have been like for those children in 1950, Steve.
Oh my goodness, yeah. You think about that and compare that to nowadays.
Hmm.
Yeah, internet can keep you busy, and movies, Netflix, and all that. None of that they had back then.
No.
So I guess, we're stuck either reading a book or sitting. Yeah, about
Hmm.
it. Well, eventually there were nearly 200 reported cases of polio in Wytheville and Wythe County, with 17 deaths. Per capita, this was the largest number of polio cases in any one town or county in America, and was enough to put the town in the national news. By late September, with the return of cooler weather, the epidemic subsided with almost no new cases reported, and soon after, the quarantine was lifted and things slowly got back to normal in the Southwest Virginia town. Most children survived without ill effects, but many had to learn to walk again or learn to live with leg braces. A few whose paralysis extended to their lung muscles were confined to iron lungs to survive. Um, Rod, here's an interesting side note. By the time the quarantine ended, town officials found that all the signs warning people not to stop had been stolen or demolished. And even with a hefty reward, no one ever came forward, and to this day, nobody knows what happened to those signs.
After this epidemic, efforts were redoubled to find a cure for polio, and in the early 1950s, Dr. Jonas Salk developed a vaccine. In order to make sure it worked and was safe, in 1954, Salk conducted field tests on human subjects and including his own children. One declared safe, the vaccine was released to the general public in 1955, and it pretty much ended the polio epidemic.
Yes, it did. And I think just about everybody took the polio vaccine. Um, do you remember taking that vaccine when you were a kid?
I was very young, but I'm told it's like the discussion I had with someone here not long ago, and not being political here, but we're
Hmm.
talking about the vaccine and everything for COVID, and I had someone ask me, "Do you remember taking the COVID vaccine or the polio vaccine?" And I said, "No, I don't remember, but I had faith in it that it was going to work." Now I look at it, I had faith in it. My parents had faith in it that it was going to work. It was about the same thing as today, but I no, I don't remember it, but I've got the scar to prove it over here. I mean, what is it? Polio and smallpox or something? The little scars you've got on your arm. I can remember those.
Well, that would be the smallpox, I think. That the first
Hmm.
vaccines were shots, and they
Yeah.
did leave a big scar on you. But they
Hmm.
stopped those, I think, in 1963 or 64. And then they went to the sugar cube.
Oh, okay.
They put a little drop of that stuff on a sugar cube. You put it in your mouth, and that's it. You were vaccinated. I do remember doing that.
Okay. Now that's probably, I don't remember that. It's something that I probably never even thought about at the time or when it was given to me. So,
Yeah. Well, we posted this story on Facebook the first time we did it.
hmm.
And boy, it turned out to be one of the most popular posts we ever had. In fact, we got quite a few comments from people who were either remember something that they did during this epidemic
Right.
or that they know of somebody who told them stories about it. For example, one commenter told of his brother in Marion who caught polio, and it was the second worst case in town. Now, he remembered a policeman from Wytheville with 5 kids, bringing each one into the hospital each day for 5 days and losing his 3-year-old daughter.
Mm.
Now, another one remembers coming home on leave from the service and not being allowed into town, so he had to take the long way around to make it home, go around Wytheville instead of going through it.
Wow.
Lots of these stories. Now, there's some more there, aren't there, Rod?
Yes, there are, Steve. Another recounted how her sister, she got the illness and was photographed coming home and how that picture made it into Look magazine. Now, for folks, if you've never heard of Look magazine, yeah, you're behind the times. Look magazine was sort of your life magazine of the time back in the 1950s, but they were very similar in a lot of ways. But this magazine took that picture of her coming home and being brought home, and there was a magazine article about the epidemic. And one person even told of her nephew, who was one of the children who volunteered to take Jonas Salk's experimental polio vaccine. And one, Mary Lee Jones Stutes, told us this story, didn't she, Steve?
She did. Now, what she told, and I'm not gonna read what she said, but I'll
Mm-hmm.
kind of paraphrase it. She had an aunt, her mother's sister, Edith Klein Grubb, who had polio during that time, and she was about 16. And according to her, the polio paralyzed Miss Grubb's throat, so
Mm.
she couldn't swallow. They took her to a hospital in Roanoke, where the doctors had 2 solutions. One was to put a feeding tube down her nose that would she'd have that for the rest of her life.
Right.
The other was to quote unquote shock her by unexpectedly throwing her into a pool of cold water, which is an interesting way to do it.
Yeah.
I guess it worked. We'll see. Uh, this woman's granny had to choose. She said she didn't want the aunt to have to live with a tube down her nose and gave them permission to shock her aunt. The doctor said the shock would either make her swallow or would cause her death. What a choice. Well, they put 2 doctors in rubber suits into a pool, smaller than a swimming pool, but larger than a hot tub filled with ice water. Another doctor walked into the room with this lady's aunt to supposedly show her the pool. When they got to the edge, they pushed her in. The doctors in the rubber suits were there to pull her out of the ice water, which was over her head. She did swallow, but she always had a quaver or a quivering quality to her voice, and before she died, she had to have a tracheostomy. But at least she was able to swallow without having to have a tube down her throat for the rest of her life.
Wow.
Yeah, it is unreal, but it's pretty much gone now. With the polio vaccine and most everybody taking it, we don't see polio, I think hardly at all, period. So hopefully at some point the same thing will be done with COVID, and it'll be a memory too, some story in a podcast in 2100 maybe. We'll just see. Well, folks, that's the story of the Wytheville polio epidemic of 1950. Another bit of the history of this place we call home, Appalachia. Thanks for listening. Now, you can subscribe to the audio version of the Stories podcast on your favorite podcast app. Till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.
So long.